however you want to call that. I make my will match the will of the Ein Sof. But either way, whether I'm doing it because I want to and I love it, or I'm doing it because I'm forcing myself and I don't really want to, it's still my will that I'm replacing with the will of the Ein Sof, right? No matter what, I'm still saying, small Ash wants to sleep in, the Ein Sof wants him to get up and go help people and make breakfast and do good things. So I'm going to pick the Ein Sof's will over small Ash's will, right? With Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, etc., there actually was no replacement anymore. It was like a chariot. And as we said last week, what will does a chariot have? If the rider of the chariot says, turn right, does the chariot have to, like a horse, go, well, I like that hay, but you know what? I'm trained to go this way, so here I go, right? A chariot doesn't have that. A chariot has no will of its own. It's only the will of the rider directly channeled. Yeah? So beyond even someone being so in tune with Torah values and higher values and other-centered values that they'll always replace their will with that will, the patriarchs were chariots, which meant it was simply divine ratzon flowing through them. So when they spoke, when they acted, it was beyond even the level of the prophets, where we say that the Ein Sof was speaking from their throats, because even the prophets had throats, and they were aligning their voice, their speech, with the Ein Sof. At the level of the patriarchs, there was no them anymore. If you watch them walking down the street, you're seeing divine will walk down the street, right? Very, very, very few. I mean, they're the only people that are referred to as the chariots that I'm aware of, right? Even Moshe, although he was on a higher level as a prophet, was not a chariot. Moshe had other qualities. So because of that nature, each one of them opened up a channel, and Abraham in particular opened up a channel, Abraham and Sarah, a channel for each of us to receive this new soul, which just like Abraham was, basically you're looking at the Ein Sof and the Ein Sof's will, now each one of us received a little tiny piece of the Ein Sof as part of our soul that hadn't come down before. And it's incredible to think about it. Even Abraham was not born with this divine soul. Right? Abraham, like the first Jew, one of the greatest spiritual masters that ever lived, he wasn't born with a divine soul, and yet we get that advantage. Right? So it's something incredible to think about, that this was a new phenomenon, right? That once the divine souls were granted, now every one of these descendants has this love of God hidden within them, whether they like it or not, whether they know it or not. And that's what we're going to learn to seize on and to harness for this technique. Therefore, Velken, zachu lamshich nefesh ruach neshama livneihem, achreihem ad olam me'eser sfirot dikdusha shebar'a olamot atzilut bria yitzir asiya v'chol echad v'echad kfi madregato uchfi ma'asav.
Therefore, they inherited the privilege of drawing down for all the subsequent generations, their descendants, forever, and nefesh,
Ruach, yeah.
Ruach, and Neshama,
Mm-hmm.
from the holy Sefirot, the four winds of Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah,
And Asiya, yeah.
in which the four worlds, and from which the Sefirot within the worlds, does the soul originate, each individual according to his level and according to his deeds. His level refers to the level of the root of his soul. His deeds refer to the one's effort toward refining himself. As the Zohar states, when one betters himself, he is given a higher order of the soul.
All right, so if you're watching and you're confused, look back to chapter, the attributes of the divine soul is chapter 2, right? I think it's chapter 2, maybe 3. But luckily we all learned about the 10 attributes within the divine soul and the animal soul, right? And we went through very quickly the Kabbalistic identity of each of those sefirot. So we're going to retouch on that now for a moment. There are, in the creation of the universe, which is happening right now and at every moment, above the physical world, we know there are 4 spiritual worlds, which themselves are each a category which have infinite levels within them, which are their own worlds, so to speak. And every one of those worlds, the godliness of that world is the sefirot within that world. The sefirot interface, the They interface with the world as the godliness interfaces with that world as the Sfirot. So you have 10 Sfirot in Atzilus, 10 Sfirot in Bria, 10 Sfirot in Yetzirah, 10 Sfirot in Asiya. And now, when we say that we each have a divine soul, that soul still comes from a certain place. It has a root within that structure of how the world is being formed. So if you're a great, great high-level soul that has the potential to be incredibly sensitive to God, even to the point of perhaps having prophetic qualities, then your soul is going to come from somewhere in Atzilus, and perhaps one of the higher Sfirot in Atzilus. And your consciousness, if you work on yourself, and if you improve yourself and you allow it, your consciousness would be basically the same as something like a soul when it's still in Atzilus. That'll be your perspective. Right? So that person, a big, big tzaddik, would be walking around looking at godliness, not looking at creations, because their soul comes from above Bria, above where creation starts, where identity starts. So this is, if you want to call it an enlightened person, if they work on themselves, they can be. But they're just looking at God, having a conversation with God. That's their perspective. And you think you're looking at a body when you talk to them, hearing a separate person, and they know they're just listening in on God, having a conversation about what the world might look like if these people happen in a room together, but it's all godliness to them. Now travel lower to the world of Bria. You still have a very, very lofty soul, but this soul at least exists as a created being now. Even though the world of Bria is very lofty, and their perspective is somewhat like that if they work on themselves. Go down lower to Yetzirah, and now you have a soul that might be very, very emotionally powerful, because that's the world of emotion. And their perspective can be different if they work on themselves, a much higher soul still, until you finally get to the world of Asiya, which is where most souls are from. And there you have the 10 Sfirot again, so you might be from a higher or a lower Sfirot than Yetzirah, and then finally get to the bulk of humanity, which is the lowest Sphira of Asiya. And even in that, there are levels, as we'll see. So if you remember that whole structure of the spiritual world and how the world is created, these divine souls that we each receive come and are rooted from somewhere in that structure. Doesn't mean that I'm gonna succeed and be productive in the world necessarily, right? Because even someone with a high soul, it's no guarantee they're not going to mess up and miss the mark for themselves. And in fact, people with very lofty souls, when they miss the mark, they can do a lot of harm. It can really look pretty bad, right? Because they just have a lot of potential, and if it goes well, great, but if it goes poorly, the opposite, right? Whereas somebody with a lower root soul might actually be performing at a much higher level than someone with a higher root soul, right? Because they're doing their work, they're finishing their tasks, they're refining what needs to be refined for their soul, and they may be accomplishing great things compared to some of the higher souls. So it's no guarantee. ועל כל פנים, אפילו לקהל שבקהלים ופושעי ישראל נמשך בזיווגם נפש דנפש דמלכות עשייה.
At any rate, even the unworthiest and most sinful Jew
Whoa,
draws down
yeah.
in their marital union and nefesh from the level of nefesh of malchut d'asiyah, the attribute of royalty in the world of action. This means to say that...
Yeah, we don't have to read this whole thing. We have to explain it. Yeah. So even the least reverent person, right? We learned that at the moment of marital union, at the moment of conception, that's when that soul is drawn down, and there's a really well-known tradition amongst very, very spiritual Jews that moment you're really seeking a lofty soul to bring into your family. And there's even stories of tzaddikim and rebbes, etc., who, it's basically they could go in and be like, I want that soul. They were so sensitive to what was going on in heaven that at that time, they really were attuned to what souls and what Gilgalim were going on and who they needed to come down to help them in their mission. But generally, it's just, are you in it because it feels good, or are you in it because you're into making oneness and bringing your soul into the world, right? And also, if you keep different halachot around the family, how much have you stuck to your model for that? That also comes into play, of course. But it's known that moment of union and the state of mind of both the parents at that moment brings down a soul. And so even the least reverent, even if this is just, we're having a fling and we're in it because it feels good and we didn't want to get pregnant and we weren't thinking about it and it just was completely off the chart. This was not about reverent bringing down of a new soul into the world. Even that union will bring down at least a divine soul of nefesh of malchut. Oh, I thought it was malchut of malchut v'siyah. Nefesh to malchut v'siyah. Right, so at other points he actually says malchut of malchut v'siyah. But so if we want to go what this lowest level is, every level, as we're about to see, includes all the other levels in holiness. So no matter how low you are, you still include the highest points. No matter how high you've gone, you still include the lowest. That's the nature of holiness. It's inter-inclusive. So even if I'm drawing down just a level of within a Siyah, the lowest sphere of Malchut, and within that level, the Malchut within Malchut, the lowest level, and within that Malchut, there's three levels, Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama as well, the same as in our souls. I'm drawing down the lowest level of Nefesh. That I still get that. I can't go below that. A divine soul is always going to be within holiness. And as we'll see, because holiness inter-includes everything, the very highest point, Chochmah B'Tzilus, is still, through this complex system, included within that lowest soul. So we all have access to that complete self-nullification, that complete transformative love of God that Chochmah of Atzilus brings in, even if I get it through the many, many, many reflections, call them, that lead down to this lowest level of a soul I've drawn down. So that means everybody, right? The point he's making is, no matter how distant you may feel, no matter how little information I may have, no matter how irreverent I might have been, I am guaranteed to have this level of love hidden within me and within my kids. Shehi madrega ha-tachtona shebikdushat hasiyah.
This is the lowest level of holiness in the world of
Hasiyah, so we're going to go through it. V'af al pichen me'achar shehi me'eses sfirot kedushot.
Yet, since Malchut is one of the 10 holiest of the world, and since holiness is the realm of unity, where every level is compromised of all the other levels.
Perforce, therefore. So, right, so once you're dealing with a sphera, we say there's 10 sphirot and they have different definitions, but they're all in the Ein Sof, right? So they're unified. You can't separate them at all. So even though we're talking about Malchut as being separate from the other sphirot, this is the light of Ein Sof. This is all just holiness. So within Malchut is all the other sphirot. You don't get lost from it. He klula mikulan gam mechochma dasiya.
The lowest level in Siyah is compounded of all the other levels in the Siyah, including Fatma, Via Siyah, visible world of action, the highest secret in the Siyah.
Right, so now he's saying, okay, this soul's nefesh of Malchut of Asiyah, but within it is Chochmah of Asiyah. So that same world of Asiyah, the Malchut contains all the other sphirot, including Chochmah. Chochmah being that complete self-nullification at the beginning of my consciousness where the Ein Sof can enter in. Right? So the Ein Sof can still get in even though my soul is rooted down in Malchut of Asiyah. Shebetocha melubeshet Chochmah de Malchut datzilut.
Within Chochmah of Asiyah, disclose Chochmah of Malchut Asiyah.
Right, let's not go through the
Royalty in the world.
let's not go through all of the descriptions of how it gets there. But since everything is inter-included all the way down, now that I've got Chochmah of Asiyah included, that includes Chochmah of Atzilut, the highest world. Right? And you could go through each world and see how it goes through Malchut, it becomes Keter, the next world, and that enters as Chochmah and becomes Malchut. But ultimately, no matter how many Russian dolls I'm stacking, it all includes Chochmah of Atzilut all the time. And what's in Chochmah of Atzilut? Shebetocha Chochmah of Atzilut sheba meir or Ein Sof Baruch Hu mamash.
Since all of us be wrote about Siyah according to each other, which in turn is illuminated by the afterlife of the blessed Ein Sof.
Now, why is it important that this is Chochmah of Atzilut, right? This is an interesting conversation. Let's put a little sticker there mentally. right? Because we're talking about this divine soul that has this love. But why all this business of Chokhmah Tzilut? Why does that figure? And what's the quality we know about Chokhmah vis-a-vis my rational identity? Right? How does Chokhmah, which is that first spark of awareness that I don't understand, how does that relate to my identity of what I think and what I think is right and wrong and how I work things out? Right? How do those two relate? Is it above it or is it below it? It's above it. Right? So there's some things that are just such deeply held beliefs you shouldn't kill. Right? I don't have to explain it to someone. I mean, I can have rational reasons why I shouldn't murder, but that doesn't change. And if somebody presented an argument why I should murder that was sound, it wouldn't change my conviction that I shouldn't murder. Because although I have intellectual reasons why, and that's Bina, don't murder actually comes from Chokhmah. It's just one of my most deeply held convictions, and it's beyond rational arguments. Right? Rational arguments can't touch it. That's the point of Chokhmah in my soul. Right? There's just this wisdom that it is wrong to murder someone, and although I can intellectualize it, that it's not from an intellectual stance that I believe it, right? And so our connection with the Ein Sof and our love for the Ein Sof, with this technique we're using, actually comes from that level of Chokhmah of Atzilus, which means that it's above any possible rationalization I've created in my life. I walk around and I believe there's no God and I just can do whatever I want and that's that, and I live my life that way. That doesn't touch this love that comes from Chokhmah Atzilus, because that's a completely self-nullified, it's a core identity. It's not an intellectual thing. Right? So the love we're using, it doesn't matter if you have the intellectual material to generate it, that you know all kinds of deep Kabbalistic secrets about God. Doesn't matter, because that can align with it, but that's not its source. Its source is Chokhmah Atzilus. It's above that, right? And if someone presents an argument why I shouldn't love God, because this happened historically, or just this logical argument or whatever, okay, it makes sense to me, to my personality, but to Chokhmah Atzilus, it makes no difference. Doesn't touch it. Right? There's a story that Elie Wiesel told when he was in, I think, Auschwitz, and there were a lot of very learned people with him at one point, and this was going on, and they decided, they were going to take God to a din Torah. They were going to actually judge God for crimes against humanity, and so they went into it, and they set up an actual formal din Torah. And they argued it and back and forth, and went very deep into halachic arguments about whether God was guilty of crimes against humanity, until finally, after a long process with these great knowledgeable Torah scholars, the verdict came down that God was guilty of crimes against humanity. Done. And then Elie Wiesel says, then one of them turned to everyone and said, okay, now it's time to daven Mariv. Right, let's go. Right? It's time to daven. So, yes, they went through this great minds went through and came up with a very logical conclusion that there was no other possibility but that God was guilty of crimes against humanity, and so you could say, that's it, we're done with God. But to their plain, simple faith, they were all in touch with Chokhmah of Atzilus. They knew this stuff. It's like, okay, that's Bina. Now let's go daven Mariv, right? Our relationship with God and our love for God does not depend on that intellectual stuff, right? It's great when the intellectual stuff can reinforce it, right? It's great when we're not in the middle of a horrible tragedy and we have to struggle with that, but it doesn't depend on it. And no argument in the world, no experience in the world can touch this hidden love, because it's from Chokhmah Atzilus. It's from that core identity that understands and believes things, not with the sense of belief like, oh, I believe the store is 3 blocks that way, but with a sense of belief as in ani mamin. I believe in the Mashiach. I believe in Judaism. I believe in God. Right? It's a deeply held conviction that nothing can touch. So that's why the Alter Rebbe is going through what the source of this love is, that it's Chokhmah Atzilus. And we know the quality is that no matter what I thought or think, that love is still there, untouched by my own identity.
So is it like DNA?
That is the spiritual DNA of the divine soul, like DNA, exactly. You got it in you. כדכתיב, השם בחוכמה יסד ארץ, וכולם בחוכמה עשיתה.
As it is written, God in his wisdom founded the earth. The word God in his wisdom shows us that the light of being self illuminates the sifra of Chokmah, while the word wisdom found in the earth indicates the Chokmah is clothed in Malchut, which is called earth. For like the earth, Malchut is the lowest level in its hierarchy, and it is further written, in the wisdom you have made them all. The word made indicates the Chokmah is clothed in Atsiya, action.
And it's less direct and poetic in English, right? Because you look at this and you say, in wisdom you made them all. So wisdom and made aren't, Asiya and made don't sound the same. But in Hebrew, Asiya is from lasot, to do. So the world of Asiya is the world of doing, the world of action. So when we say with wisdom you made it all, now this connection makes sense. It's with Chokhmah that the world of Asiya is actually emerges. And the same with the first quote, B'chokhmah yasad aretz. Aretz is another way of referring to Malchut, the earth, the bottom of everything, right? And Yasad is related to Yesod, right? Chokhmah bina dat chesed gvura tiferet netzachod Yesod, right? So the sphere of Yesod is like the foundational connection, the identity that flows into Malchut. So here it's actually bringing in Chokhmah and Yesod, and also Malchut as in Aretz. So in this quote, B'chokhmah Yesad Aretz, it sounds like it's just like, God shaped the earth with wisdom, and it's poetical from Proverbs, but Kabbalistically we're saying, you think you're dealing with Malchut, but really through Yesod, Chokhmah of Atzilus is actually creating Malchut too. So even though my soul is from the level of Malchut, Chokhmah is within that. Right? And for people that dig these things, these are very convincing quotes. I know for us it's a little explanation and a stretch, but these are often used. ונמצא כי אין סוף ברוך הוא מלובש בבחינת חוכמה שבנפש האדם, יהיה מי שיהיה מישראל.
That the light of the blessed Ein Sof is garbed in the faculty of wisdom in the human soul of whatever sort of a Jew he may be. Further in the chapter, the Alter Rebbe explains why it is the faculty of wisdom in the soul that receives the illumination of the Ein Sof.
So we're really driving this point home that every one of us has this hidden love, whatever our history, whatever our conception, whatever our relationship to God or Judaism, it's there for us to harness. ובחינת החוכמה שבה, אם אור אינסוף ברוך הוא המלבש בו, מתפשטת בכל בחינות הנפש כולה, אחייתה מבחינת ראשה עד בחינת רגלה.
In turn, the soul's faculty of wisdom, together with the light of the blessed Ein Sof that is garbed in it, suffuses all the levels of the soul in its entirety, from head to foot as it were. That is, from the highest level of the soul to the lowest, to animate them with godly vitality.
So not only is this divine light sort of hidden within me as a love, but also what is the actual vitality that causes me to be alive and to flow and to function, to eat and to see and to talk? That's also Chokhmah of Atzilus ultimately, and the light of Ein Sof that's in it. Right? So even though it may have filtered down, been processed to the world of Asiya and the bottom of that world, every bit, every jewel of energy that I have and that I express, that comes from the Ein Sof. That's the energy that's powering my whole soul. So it's in my whole identity. It's actually the thing that's given me life. כדכתיב, החוכמה תחיה ועליה.
Wisdom gives life to those who possess it. The soul which possesses the faculty of wisdom receives its life from the means of the faculty as stated above.
And so there has to be a plug where this Or Ein Sof, this power source, creates me and enlivens me. And that plug for my consciousness is chokhmah, right? And in terms of my soul and the levels that my soul is connected to, that's chokhmah silus of the cosmos. That's where our life force comes from, right? If you want to have an address for where the soul gets its power bill from. Do you guys, Consumers Energy treat you all well? Is it? Just curious. Consumers Energy? Is it like a, oh yes, or it's like a, ugh? No one's saying anything. Okay, just wondering. Nothing. We just. Yes, Jen was on the phone with them for a while, so I wanted to check.
Well, I think there was possibly a polling now or something, all kinds of rescue and every kind of thing.
Yeah.
It was a mess, and from weeks to run, there was no electricity down there.
Yeah.
So it's hit in different areas, yeah.
Yeah. So everything's a reflection of everything, right? So we see how important it is that some faraway company managed their repairs and their service correctly, so that I can toast my bread in the morning, right? And someone might say, well, what does your toaster have to do with that company wherever they are? But I know if they manage it properly, now the energy in my toaster is there and accessible, right? So same thing here, right? We each have our own little house here, but all the energy comes from this one same place very far off, and in this case, the management is very experienced. ולפעמים ממשיכים פושעי ישראל נשמות גבוהות מאוד שיהיו באים כהקליפות כמו שכתוב בספר גלגולים.
At times, the sinners of Israel may even bring down for their children very lofty souls, which have been in the depths of the Kalipot, as explained in Sefer Gilgulim.
I won't read the editorial on that, but this is, So we talked about Sefer Gilgulim at one point, and that's the book by the Arizal that describes reincarnation, how it flows in the Jewish pathway, and it's fascinating book, just very upfront, not sort of poetically hidden. He's really just lays it right out. And there's this phenomenon where you'd think only really lofty souls could draw down a very lofty soul because their state of mind at the time of conception and their merit and their sensitivity to godliness would let them pick those souls. And there's some competition for those souls, so it's not you gotta really get them. There's not that many of them. So how could just a very irreverent or normal person draw down a lofty soul? And yet we see sometimes in history, and we know from tradition, that sometimes a great ascetically born in a very, call them like not notable family for their reverence or for anything, right? So how can that happen? So there's an explanation, and then there's how it relates to our conversation, right? The explanation is that not every soul, even if it's a lofty soul, when it comes down for life, succeeds in its test, and sometimes they can fail quite seriously. And when they do, now that soul is sort of held in the clutches of the klipa, is what it's called, right? So that soul is like needs another chance to get out of that whole system, and the klipa, the other side of creation, that's not the holiness. It's got a stake in that soul. It has that soul, and the soul can't quite get back up to heaven without another chance, right? And so, by the Ein Sof perspective, it's good for that soul to come back into a life, because that'll give that soul a chance to do a redo. And the klipa is not so interested, because it's got this soul, it's a prized possession. It doesn't really want to give this lofty soul another chance to get in, because not only will it probably get out of its clutches, but it'll probably do a lot of good and elevate a lot of other sparks and destroy a lot of other klipa. So the klipa is, it's got this ace in the, I don't know what the expression would be, ace in the hole in your hand. That's a card game thing. It's got an ace in the hole. Doesn't want to give it up, right? So this is the deal that's cut. The deal that's cut is the Ein Sof says to the klipa, okay, we'll put it in this really, really challenging situation of being born in a family where it doesn't get the education, it doesn't get the role modeling, it doesn't get et cetera, doesn't get the sensitivity. And so that way, we'll tilt the odds. So, and the klipa says, oh good, in a family like that, this soul is probably going to mess up again and come back and create all kinds of other problems and bring more energy into klipa, so they cut a deal. So that's why this very lofty soul, tradition tells us, came down to this family. And so sometimes that'll trip that soul up again, because as a child you'd rely on your family for conditioning. But sometimes that soul will still become a great tzaddik by working on themselves and kind of rise up out of their past mistake. Yeah.
I'm just thinking of the word transmigration, whatever that means. It's on the bottom where I read. So are all these souls?
Transmigrating.
Yeah, reincarnation.
Really the word, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know what transmigration means. I think they just didn't want to say reincarnation, maybe. Did they say reincarnation later?
No, it doesn't. It just says
Yeah, I have a feeling that was an editorial thing where when this is published, reincarnation was kind of an Eastern thing, and they probably wanted to avoid the word, maybe. But yeah, when a soul, Gilgul HaNefesh means the wheel, the spinning of the soul, and that when the soul spins off another soul, as it were, that enters into another body from the same soul, that's transmigration. So the soul was in one body, now it's in another body. So call it what you want in English. It's Gilgul HaNefesh. Now, how does this relate to our conversation about the divine soul and chokhmah of Atzilus and the divine soul and love and awe? This, the Alter Rebbe is bringing as proof that really it doesn't have to do with my conscious identity. It doesn't have to do with my level of knowledge. It doesn't have to do with my intellectual or emotional qualities. It doesn't have to do with anything. It has to do with the fact that I have a divine soul. Because the fact that two very ordinary Jews who don't have great knowledge or learning and maybe are from a very low level, so to speak, spiritually, could bring down a great tzaddik means that it doesn't have to, this isn't about any conditioning or any quality or any personality or anything at all. This is just about, as you said, our spiritual DNA. Every one of us has a divine soul which contains Chokhmah V'Tzilus, which contains the Or Ein Sof. Therefore, at our essence, each one of us is just like that tzaddik that was brought down. At our essence, every one of us is a tzaddik. At our most essential point, the point where the divine soul is God, there we're tzaddik. It may be very far from our conscious reality and from our behavior, but we all have that potential. And the fact that someone like me or an ordinary Jew could actually give birth to a great tzaddik means that we are actually, at our root, we are the same, right? I was able to bring down that DNA. And we go on. Now, Chokhmah, Hine, HaChokhmah hi Mekor HaSechel VeHavana.
Now, Chachma, which as explained in chapter 3, is the initial flash of intellect, the nebulous, seminal glimmer of an idea, is the source of intelligence and comprehension, which first begin to emerge in the faculty of Bina. For as explained there, Bina represents the ability to grasp an idea in all its details and ramifications.
And here we're getting into the quality of why it is that this love that we're going to learn to use is not dependent on what I think, is not dependent on my worldview at all. Right? Because if you look at what Chokhmah is, it's higher than Bina. And next week we'll get into the idea of Koachma, of the power of what it is. But if you were with us when we learned Shari V'Emunah, the second part of the Tanya, he brought a beautiful, beautiful example where he said, if someone were to say to you, we're going to learn an idea, a mathematical idea that's so profound, so deep, no one in this room has an arm long enough to reach down and touch it. It's too deep an idea. Right? You just look at me and scratch your head. Like, what does the length of my arm have to do with the depth of the idea? It's not physical depth. The depth of an idea is not like I dropped a penny in a hole and I can't reach it. It's something else, right? And if my arm were 20 feet long, I still couldn't reach any idea, no matter how deep or how shallow. Right? It's something else. Your mind goes, so to speak, into a depth to reach the idea, but we get that the world of physical reaching of an arm, the world of action, is a different world than the world of depth of thought. And you shouldn't, they don't reach each other. Right? That's clear. So when I say, I don't love God because I can't understand God, when I hear that statement, I should scratch my head just the same way I would if someone said, I can't reach that thought because my arm isn't long enough. Right? An arm can't reach a thought. It's a different world. The same thing with intellect and the Ein Sof. Intellect cannot understand the Ein Sof. And to say, I can't understand the Ein Sof with my intellect, that's like saying I can't reach the idea with my hand. They're two completely different qualities. The only way the Ein Sof, the light of the Ein Sof rather, enters into consciousness is through Chokhmah, which is incomprehensible. That's that first spark that Bina can't get at. Right? So again, all this is to drive home and make clear in our minds that we're dealing with a love that we can't work out, we can't understand. Yeah, you can create a rational understanding that mirrors it, that supports it, but that's not understanding the Ein Sof. That's not allowing the Ein Sof to flow in. That's just Chokhmah. So this love we're looking at, it's something that is beyond all of our conscious faculties. And we'll learn how to use it in future classes. I do want to keep with our short, long path. And so to do that, I want to introduce a new meditation today. So we've been working on, was that like a gasp of joy? Good. Okay, I heard a gasp from somewhere. I heard, I don't know if it was like, oi. This is a nice one, though. So Shema, we're working with, which is Siu Marom Enechem, lift up your eyes. I hope people are still using that as a time of meditation for our short, long path, because that is our main technique, and we're going to keep with that as we learn the other technique. I want to introduce another meditation that I think is really useful, that also attaches to the Shema. That is... Uh-oh. We have enough. Hey. So if you look at the end of the Shema, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, right? So that word. Is that right? Never drawn olive properly. It's that way, right? Yeah. Call that an olive. Right, so what is the value? My chet's a little wide there. What's the value of aleph? 1. What's the value of chet? Got to think about that. What is that? 8. Chet is so 8. What's the value of daled? 4. Very good. 4. So in this word echad, there's the aleph, the 1, the chet 8, and the daled, the 4. Remember, in Hebrew, numbers are letters, so it's not like a stretch, right? Often when you're writing, you'll say, the daled directions. You won't say arba. You can use daled as the number. So the meditation here is, when we get to the end of the Shema, that first line. Oh, sorry, I turned the mic off. Hi, everybody. So echad is the last word of the Shema, and echad has 3 letters, aleph being 1, chet being 8, daled being 4. Now you're caught up. Sorry, I hit the switch there. So the meditation for the end of the Shema here is that when we say the word echad, we can draw it out as an echad. And I get some eyebrows, but, try it in the privacy of your boudoir, and it's really a nice moment. And in your mind you have the aleph is that there's one God. The chet is that God is one in the 7 heavens plus the earth. As we say, there's 7 heavens. That expression being in 7th heaven, it comes from the 7 heavens in our tradition. And then the 4 is the 4 directions. Right? So north, south, east, and west. So this is the mitzvah of unifying God, and it's definitely a way of channeling the light of the Ein Sof into consciousness. Because when I unify God, that's an actual commandment, to believe that God's one. And so I'm unifying God, there's one God, in any state of consciousness, all the way up to the highest heavens, and in the earth, in every single direction. So when I get to the end of that first line of the Shema, I hold in my mind this word echad and what it represents, and I use that to unify every experience I have in the day, that no matter where I go, no matter what conscious experience I have on the earth, it's all just a conversation with God. Everything is divine providence. And when I insert that into my mind as a meditation, and I focus on it, that again will create different emotions. Like, for instance, right, how might my new emotions be different than my pre-echad emotions? Let's give ourselves an example here. Give me some scenario. Anybody try it out? Right, say the famous flat tire, right? You're going to some important meeting, and boom, you get a flat tire. And now, what's your next hour and a half going to look like? Stress, waste of time, miss the meeting, sucks, right? Aggravation, right? Why did this happen, right? If I were running the world, this flat tire wouldn't have happened, right? So who's the center of that experience? Me, right? Now, if I have my echad meditation in mind, what new emotions can I generate besides my, let's call it stress and frustration and maybe anger? What new emotions might emerge? Patience. Why? Right. It's going to take time. And that time, that need, that's God, right? And whatever this experience is, wherever I happen to be, that's still one God, right? So now I'm not saying, why is this happening? I'd run the world differently. I'm saying, oh, I guess God needs me to be here for the next hour and a half, and there's a good reason I don't understand, right? So maybe more patience, right? So that's one new emotion that might generate out of this meditation, right? What's another emotion in that scenario, right? Flat tire, important meeting, missing, frustrated, waste of time, right? What's another emotion that might emerge from this meditation?
Frustration.
Now we're going for an other-centered emotion from our meditation. So not,
Loss.
pardon me?
Loss of a loved one.
Okay, we can leave that one, right? So loss of a loved one, that's a very heavy one, right? Yeah. So loss of a loved one, the deepest pain one can have, right? Might be just I'm going to lose myself in that loss, and that's going to now define my whole life, and I'm going to just drift off into that. Or I could say, even in that experience, the most painful experience, right? Wherever it takes me, there's still one God. There's some meaning in that. I may never see the meaning. Doesn't mean it's not there, right? And that may just look like the pain is easier to deal with, right? That just may look like a year and a half on, my life is a little more together than it would have been without that meditation. That's okay, right? So when it comes to flat tires, this meditation may put us in a very high-functioning state. When it comes to great loss, it may put us in, a little less of a mess, maybe, right? Let's be honest. But wherever we are, whatever our state of consciousness, the memory that there's one God will generate new emotions, and that's what we use the first technique for. So let's use our new focus. We've got perfect amount of time. And Adam, if you'd put up the echad on the screen, so if you're watching at home, you can also focus on that. Just find yourself in any comfortable position. You can be sitting, reclining, standing, doesn't matter. And just, if you aren't aware of your breathing, bring your awareness to your breathing and try and even out that rhythm. Do a quick scan of your body and see if there's anything that's holding or gripping unnecessarily. Perhaps let it chill. And if you let your breath cause a swelling in your belly rather than a rising in your chest, bring your breath right down to your diaphragm and open up your belly as you breathe in and hold and out. Hold. And even out those four aspects of the breath. Now open up our wisdom gateway, that space between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath. Should be quite familiar by now. So welcome back to your wisdom gateway. A little bit spiritual, but at the end of the in-breath, once you're in that wisdom gateway, try and stay there through the rest of the breathing, even though the breathing is in a cycle. You can sort of remain in that wisdom gateway. If you're at home, you could take as long as you want to establish this. But if you're here in the class, let's allow the word echad to emerge from that wisdom gateway. The aleph and the chet and the dalid. If you're home, you can open your eyes and look at the screen if that helps. We want those letters to be nice and big in our inner vision, nice and bright. Perhaps put them higher up in the screen of our inner eye. Now let your mind start to fill with the concept. The aleph means there's one God. Aleph is one. Chet represents the seven heavens and the earth, so any possible experience your soul could have, in a body, out of a body, in the highest heaven, any consciousness, any experience. And the dalid speaks of the four directions. So wherever I go, whatever physical place I find myself in, that aleph still applies. It's all one God for the entire day, for the entire week, the entire year. Let that divine concept fill your mind. Any corner of your mind that may be dwelling on some errand or some whatever, just let this concept flow into it, melt away anything else that fills the mind. Again, if you're at home watching on a video, feel free to pause and remain with this meditation for as long as you are interested in. But before we come out, let's just put a little pin. The next time we say the Shema, be it at home in the morning or here at Temple Israel, know that this meditation is here accessible to us. And the emotions, even if they're tuna emotions that we create, are also accessible to us. To elevate that prayer, elevate those moments, and elevate the mitzvahs we're doing. And just let your breath return to normal. And wiggle your toes and your fingers and open your eyes. Yashikoch. I hope everybody has a beautiful few weeks before Rosh Hashanah. And if anyone has any questions, I'll hang out. Thanks for a beautiful class.